So the Callisto Protocol is a game that was heavily anticipated for a couple of years before it was released, and for good reasons actually. Not only that the trailers look good, but it was a spiritual successor to the Dead Space games, one of the best games in the sci-fi horror genre, and even the original people behind Dead Space were working on it, most notably Glenn Schofield. So naturally people were excited to scratch that Dead Space itch they've been feeling for years. Even if you weren't a fan of Dead Space, the Callisto Protocol just looked like a really cool sci-fi survival horror game, and then it was released and it wasn't very well received by people and critics alike. It was divisive to say the least. But why is that? Is it just a bad game or misunderstood? Now that some time has passed, 2 years to be exact, let's have a chat and analyze what went wrong with the Callisto Protocol. The Callisto Protocol was released on December 1st, 2022. Developed by Striking Distance Studios, which was founded by co-creator of Dead Space, Glenn Schofield, who I mentioned earlier. In the Callisto Protocol, you play as Jacob Lee, an interspace courier who at the beginning of the game gets wrongfully put into this sci-fi jail located in Callisto. Callisto, if you don't know, is a moon in our solar system and not just a fictional place. In typical video game fashion, things go very wrong inside the prison and the inmates start turning into these weird creatures. Oh, not just the inmates, but also the officers too. But then you begin your kind of 7 to 8 hour-ish adventure to get out of this messed up place. The story is basic, at least at the first half of the game. Your goal is to get out of this prison, and for that you are accessing different floors, elevators, restoring power so you can get through a door. Very much video game objectives. Things get a bit more interesting in the second half of the game when you start uncovering why and how these people are turning into monsters, and that you might have had a connection to these outbreaks. But the story is good, kind of. It works, but it's nothing really to write home about. It's all stuff that we've seen before. A guy with authority thinks that humans aren't strong enough, so he starts experimenting so humans could evolve. Pretty standard horror stuff. In combat, you have a few options to take care of your enemies. First off, you have melee, a baton that you can bash the juices out of your enemies with. Sometimes enemies will block your attack and immediately swing back at you, which you can dodge or block. The dodge/block mechanic is kinda unique, and I really liked it. Essentially, when the enemy swings at you, you hold left to move left and hold right to move right, and you hold back to block. Personally, I really liked this mechanic. It feels cool to dodge, and the animations make it look convincing and cinematic. So when you finish up a combo with your baton, an on-screen indicator will pop up, then you can quick aim and shoot the enemy's weak spots to quickly take out the enemy without wasting bullets. Shooting feels good, but sometimes the shots feel like they don't connect and the enemies don't really get staggered when you shoot them. So it kind of feels unconvincing and unsatisfying to shoot. But overall, it's not really too bad. Ammo is generally rare, at least at first. But I never really ran out of it, but mostly because I was utilizing the other options such as melee and telekinesis. You get telekinesis in about 2 hours into the game, and it's just what you would expect. You pull things towards you and you throw things at enemies, pull enemies up, throw them into each other, or throw them into like a spike wall or maybe a cliff. I think it all comes together to give the combat like a rhythm. You're throwing enemies, hitting them with your baton, following up with a quick shot. The game can be pretty challenging at times. I found myself dying quite a few times before I got a part right. And it adds to the difficulty that you can outrun the enemies and you can't really heal mid-fight. I mean, you can, but most of the time you're gonna get interrupted before the healing animation finishes, so it's not really practical. I think the story, gameplay, and combat comes together to form a pretty average survival horror experience, which isn't really innovative, but it's not really brokenly bad either. Okay, now that I've told you the fundamentals of the game, now let's answer the question from earlier, the what went wrong part. So far you probably understand that I have a few gripes with the game, but those aren't worth these abominable numbers, right? Well, as I see it, there are/were three major problems with the game. The first major problem is the game is boring. The Callisto Protocol looks amazing, and the facial animations, environmental details, it's all pretty spot on. But for a video game to be good, it has to be fun to play. 90% of the time what you're doing in the game is being stuck somewhere and finding a way to unstuck yourself, or you're going from one room to another to reach the room you actually want to reach. I know this is being harsh at the game, but there really isn't much else. It's not really engaging or captivating. It doesn't make you feel the need to keep playing. I was really enjoying the vibe and style and the way the game kicked off, but it got kinda old after a while. Same can be said about the combat encounters. Everything just gets a bit samey after 2 or 3 hours. Most of the bad reviews I've read say that the game is boring, and I can't really blame them for that. The second problem with the game is that it's not scary, like at all. There were a few unexpected jump scares, but they scare you about as much as a wet noodle would, unless you've never played a horror game. The later enemy designs are kinda cool, but the early game enemies are pretty basic and just gross for the sake of being gross. The last but not the least big problem the Callisto Protocol has, or at least had, is the price and what you are getting for the price. At the time of recording this, the base game is $20 and the final transmission DLC is $7. So about $27 for basically the full game, which is better than when it was released at least. When it came out, it was a full price for a game that I ended up finishing in about 7 hours. Not to mention the DLC, which is literally just the last chapter of the game, which was locked behind a $15 paywall. No wonder people were upset. I don't know what they were really thinking about making the literal end chapter of a game DLC, so you don't have the DLC, so you don't get to see the ending, I guess. Which I don't have to mention that it's stupid. The game also had a few technical problems on the PC at release, but I played it on the PC and didn't really have much problem, aside from a few frame drops in some specific areas. If you want my opinion, I think this game is worth playing only if you have very specific tastes. Very specific tastes being you like cool sci-fi horror games, which isn't really scary, or maybe you like experiencing good realistic graphics. But if you do plan on playing this, maybe wait for a sale, or better yet, it was free on Epic Games about a week ago, which is where I picked it up. If you did manage to get it, then that's good for you. I don't think this is a waste of time, but it is a bit hard for me to recommend since Dead Space Remake exists now, which is just an amazing game. So that's where I'm at with the Callisto Protocol. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really love it either. I liked the few ideas it had and the vibe and style it was going for, but ultimately at a point I ended up wanting to get it done with, which isn't really a good thing considering how short the game is. So even after 2 years, I don't think it's like much better, but at least with the DLC it's a complete package. But I still don't think that the game deserves scores like 30 or 3 or anything. It's more in line with like a 60 to 70-ish game. Because despite of its shortcomings, I actually ended up enjoying it a bit, and it had a few cool moments. So yeah, that's where we're at, and I guess I'll see you on the next one. But in the end, if you do end up playing the Callisto Protocol, it's not a bad game. It's just a boring one.
Welcome to your new home.